Even though everyone's playing hand traps right now, I think there's still some merit to talk about which board breakers can be useful in this current metagame that we're in. What's up guys, my name is Tcg Sam, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how good board breakers can be in the current format, and then ranking them to see which ones are worth playing in your main deck, side deck, which ones have potential, and which ones are just unplayable. I originally wasn't going to do this video, but after looking at a few of the recent topping lists, I started to notice that people are slowly putting board breakers back into their side decks and even main decks at some point. But with all that being said, let's hop straight into the video. Starting off with Harpy's Feather Duster and Lightning Storm, I think these two kind of fall in the same boat. Both are very good in the side deck, I think. And when you're going into a tournament where you're not really sure what you're going to play against, cards like this are going to be pretty solid into almost every single matchup. Even if it's something like Malice or Mitsurazio, these cards can still get some value at least. Obviously, they're not going to necessarily win you the game outright, but it's going to be usable in every single matchup pretty much. And if you're looking for cards that are useful into whatever matchup you may play against, whether it's rogue or meta, I think cards like this are some of the first cards you want to consider putting into your side deck. And of course, because people are still playing cards like Solemns in the side deck, cards like this do have additional value as well in being able to clear those super high impact cards that your engine normally wouldn't be able to play through. So overall, I think that these two cards are both very good in the side deck, and even though not every deck has to play them, if you're not really sure what to put in your side deck, I think these are some pretty solid options. Next up is Twin Twisters. I think this card's pretty unplayable right now. There's no reason you should ever be playing this card over like the mass board clears right now. There isn't anything to be gained from discarding a card to pop 2 spell and traps when these normal spells can just do more. And then Cosmic, I think Cosmic has some potential. It obviously isn't as good as it was in previous formats we had because there aren't really key spells or traps that you want to hit with Cosmic Cyclone when going second, so this card loses a lot of its value as a board breaker. And going first, there aren't that many cards that are super great to hit with this either. Even though field spells are kind of popular in this current format, I don't think they're that important to where a Cosmic Cyclone is super impactful. All that being said though, I think Cosmic is still fine. Like, I don't think it's a terrible card by any means, but I don't really think any deck off the top of my head is going to want to play this right now. Next up are Raigeki and Dark Hole. They don't really do anything against any of the top decks. I think that's the biggest problem that I have with these cards. I think I'll put these in like unplayable for now. I can't really think of any reason why you'd want to put in like these specific board breakers over some of the other ones on this list. I can't really see any reason why you'd want to put these board breakers in over any of the other ones on this list. I think they're just better cards to be used against the metagame that we have at the moment. Next up is Evenly. I think Evenly is something that I would put at like the top of potential. I don't think it's something you have to side deck by any means, but I do think this is a card that maybe is a little bit slept on at the moment. Very few decks other than Crystron and maybe Malice are going to be able to put up an Omni Negate on their end board. So that means a lot of these decks can have the potential to be somewhat vulnerable to this card. That being said though, even if decks don't necessarily have a way to outright negate Evenly, a lot of the decks just are able to inherently somehow play around this card. Like if you think about a deck like Ryzeal or a deck like Mitsurugi, they have ways to remove their own bodies from the board, and then in a new chain, they'll be able to come back onto the board. So that means they'll dodge cards like Evenly Matched, and this card won't be as impactful into those matchups. I think there are obviously a few rogue matchups that this card could be pretty good into, and it can definitely catch some opponents off guard if they really overextend their board into this, because most players aren't expecting to see this card. But outside of those specific cases, I think that Evenly is something that I think is going to be relegated to fulfilling very niche roles in very specific decks. So overall, I don't think Evenly is something that's going to be in everyone's side deck, but it's something that I don't think should be necessarily overlooked either when you're choosing to put board breakers into your side deck. Next up is Gordian Slicer. This is a new one. I think Gordian Slicer is something that has a ton of potential right now, but I don't really think there is a good home for it at the moment. Like, I think it's been seeing some experimentation in a deck like Pure Mitsurugi, which doesn't care about its extra deck, and it can be pretty good in certain scenarios. Being able to bounce cards on the field back to the hand, like, means you can even turn off some of your like own floodgates, for example, if the game comes to that. Outside of that, I think the fact that Gordian Slicer has such a steep cost and not many decks can take advantage of it right now just makes me not want to put it at anything higher than potential. I think one day this card could see play and could be pretty decent, but at least at the moment, I don't think there's a good home for this card, and that's why I'm going to put it in only potential for now. Next up is Super Poly, and I think Super Poly is also something with like a lot of potential. I don't think this is something that I would necessarily want to put into most decks at the moment, but I think there are some very specific decks that can either benefit from discarding cards to the graveyard or benefit from having like this very specific removal that's good going first and going second into some decks. My biggest problem with Super Poly as a board breaker too, is that not every end board is going to end up losing to Super Poly, and even if you're able to Super Poly away part of the board or even somehow like the most of the full board, a lot of the decks right now have so many layered disruptions that even if you're able to trade 2 cards for like 2 of their key end board pieces, it may not be enough in some cases. Decks nowadays are so good at putting up disruptions that aren't all in monster form that I feel like this card, it doesn't get nearly as much value as it did maybe in a format beforehand. I think this card maybe has some more potential as a going first card even, because it can be very hard to play around this card if your deck has a lot of mono types and a lot of mono attributes. So I do think that this card does have some potential for that reason. And then next up are the 2 books. I think Book of Moon is pretty unplayable right now. I don't really see a reason why you'd ever choose to play this. If you were to play like a card that flips monsters face down, I think Book Eclipse has like some potential right now as well. I think there's some very niche matchups where this could be pretty decent into like some Rizio boards. It can be usable if your opponent doesn't have an Eclipse Twins under the detonator. I think against some matchups as well, you're able to use it more of a going first card where you're able to like book your own monsters on the board to dodge targeting effects like Imperm and things like that. So I think this card probably won't see play unless it's in a very specific deck that can take advantage of that interaction that I just mentioned of being able to flip your own monsters face down, because I think going second, it doesn't really do enough to actually break any boards in this current metagame in my opinion. I don't think any of the end boards right now are really that susceptible to the Book of Eclipse, aside from maybe like a raw detonator pass, but that just isn't going to happen that often. Next up is Enemy Controller. I think Enemy Controller is also something I want to say is not really that good right now. Like, I would say it's probably the best card out of these unplayable cards, but I don't think it does enough as a board breaker going second. If you have to get rid of one of your own monsters to try to trade 1-for-1 with your opponents, I'm not really sure that's going to be that good at the moment. So all that is to say is I don't think Enemy Controller is something that I would personally be playing right now. Maybe in the future this card will have a time where it's able to shine again. Next up, Call by the Grave. No debate about this. I think it's definitely a main deck staple. The reason I even put it on this like board breaking tier list and not on like a going first tier list is because Call by the Grave actually has surprisingly good value when going second into a lot of the decks that we have right now. The main use case, I think, is when your opponent uses prayers to tribute Murakumo. You just instantly hit the Murakumo out of the graveyard. It likely cuts off Murakumo for good for the rest of the game, and it also makes it so you don't lose your board to a board wipe. So it's pretty good in that scenario. And of course, since everyone is playing hand traps right now, like even going second and being able to trade 1-for-1 for a hand trap when you're trying to break your opponent's half board can be pretty solid as well. So I think that Call by the Grave is definitely something you want to have in your main deck, and if not in your main, definitely in your side deck. Next up is an interesting one, and that's Spellcard Monster Reborn. And this one may not seem like a board breaker either, but I think for similar reasons as Call by, I think it has some potential in this current format. Its main use case, I think, is of course just stealing a card like Murakumo when your opponent tributes it for cost, or when your opponent goes something like Detonator Pop itself and then Eclipse try to bring it back, you can just steal the Detonator away. I think that's sort of the main use case it has as a board breaker specifically, but in some decks like Malice, it can also be pretty good as a extender going first as well. So I think for that reason, it's probably something I'll put in potential. This is something I think we see only in Malice decks right now because they can take advantage of that extra extension effect, but there are also other decks I think that can find it beneficial to like just rob a monster from your opponent's graveyard, like a deck like Fiendsmith, for example. You can just take a monster from your opponent's graveyard and then use it to link into the moon and then go into their engine from there. So I think this is actually a card that may have a surprising amount of potential. Next up is Forbidden Chalice. I don't think Forbidden Chalice is very good at the current moment. I don't really see why you'd want to play this card over something like Imperm even. Like, I don't think there are cases where Chalice is much better than Imperm ever would be, and people are already starting to cut Imperm from their decks, so I don't think this card is going to be very good right now. Next up is Forbidden Droplet, and I think Forbidden Droplet is something I will put at like something you can main deck. I'm not saying like this has to be in every single main deck, but in terms of quality of board breaker, I would say Forbidden Droplet is probably one of the best that's out there right now. I have seen this in a few lists right now. It mainly sees play in Crystron because their cards are able to get a lot of value from being in the graveyard, but I've also seen some Malice lists start to play it, and I found that interesting because I generally don't think of Malice as a deck that's like super great at using a card like Droplet. Like, losing bodies off the board is not necessarily great for them, and they don't necessarily have that many cards that like stick around on the board for free other than the field spell to send for cost for this. So I thought that was interesting, but the more I thought about it, the more I think like it sort of makes sense for Malice to do. Like, it can help them dodge a lot of key targeting effects like the detonator or cards like Imperm on like the normal summon, and that can be pretty solid if you have like an extra extender in hand. Not to mention, it also helps the deck deal with problem cards like Murakumo, Detonator, and DD Wave Hiking Caesar, which I think is a very big problem for the Malice deck. I think overall that Droplet is a very solid card. It just does exactly what you need it to do in a board breaker. You're able to send away cards that either have no use, or you're able to get extra value from cards you've already played like mid-chain. So like if you play like a normal spell card and chain Droplet, it feels pretty good because you're essentially getting like a free negate out of it. So if you were to play board breakers, Droplet I think is probably the first one you would consider putting into your deck. Next up is Metaltronus. I think Metaltronus is something that is also very good right now, but has slowly started to fall off a tiny bit. I will say it is something you can still consider siding, and it's something that I think is still fairly viable in this current format. Just because of how powerful a card like Detonator still is in the game right now. Detonator is still a big problem for a lot of decks to deal with, and just being able to have a very clean out in Metaltronus can just make it so not only do you remove the Detonator from your opponent's board, you also take it away from them and make it so they can't access it again if the game drags on longer from there. It also, of course, has the flexibility of being able to be used as a going first card if you're playing like a mirror match. So overall, I think that Metaltronus still has quite a few things going for it. But unfortunately, right now, I just think that we're at a point where we need to play like a critical mass of hand traps in our main decks. So I don't think that Metaltronus can really make the cut right now. But it still has been seeing a lot of success in the decks that have been topping. So I will say that Metaltronus is something I personally do think has a ton of potential still in this current format, and it's worth considering overall. Next up are like the Kaiju-esque monsters. So I think all of these are pretty unplayable right now. Normal Kaijus are not very good. I think the only deck that should really even be considering a Kaiju-like card is Pure Mitsu, and that's because they have a searchable one. I don't think you'd ever want to play like a normal Kaiju monster. Lava Golem, I think, is like maybe the only one I would like consider as like remotely viable. Like maybe there's some decks where you don't need your normal summon and going second, you want to clear like a Detonator plus like another end board piece, and that can be okay in those cases. But I don't think there are too many meta relevant decks that actually want to play this card, so I don't think it's going to be very good. Sphere mode, also not very good. Like the normal Kaijus, there isn't really any reason to play this at the moment right now, in my opinion. Even if you, like, let's say Sphere mode a Mouse player, for example, and you take away like Firewall and Allied Code Agnister, I think they're probably still winning the game, because if they've been able to go full combo, they have all this set up in the graveyard already and all the follow-up that they need to kill you, even with having their board wiped. So I don't think that this card is very good. Kurikara is something like maybe like Lava Golem, I think has a tiny bit of potential. Like there's some world where like you can use it on a Ryzel Detonator, and if they don't have Eclipse Stones under it, I guess it can be okay in that case. But I really don't think that these like monster tributing cards are very viable at the moment, so I wouldn't really recommend playing these in your deck unless they fulfill a very specific niche that you need for your specific deck. Next up is Triple Tactics Thrust. I think this is definitely something like I would say is very good in the side deck right now. My philosophy with this card is it's something that can be used both going first to like set floodgates, or be used going second as a pseudo board breaker, just because of how many powerful normal spells we have right now that are able to break boards, like Duster and Talents, for example. I just think that Thrust flexibility as not only a board breaker but also a going first card make it so you're able to build your side decks in a little bit more of an efficient way. You can play like more targeted hate for certain decks just because Thrust is able to let you play like one copy of a Floodgate instead of playing like 3 copies when going first, and you're able to only play like one copy of like a mass removal card like Duster instead of having to play like double Lightning Storm Duster, if you get what I mean. So overall, Thrust flexibility I think just makes it so it's definitely something I would consider putting in my side decks, and definitely something that I think a lot of decks are going to be able to take advantage of because of how generic it is and how many cards it can give you access to, both going first and going second. Talents, I think, is something it's still worth putting into your main deck. This card is still good enough to be played in its current format in your main deck, especially because everyone's maining like upwards of like 18 to like 21 hand traps. This card's almost always going to be live if you get to go first, and going second, of course, every single deck still has monster interruption, so it can be pretty solid as a board breaker in certain scenarios as well. Next up is Salesman, and this is a new addition to the tier list. I think Salesman is actually something with a ton of potential in this current format. Obviously not something you would ever main unless like maybe you're playing like White Forest and you want it to be used to call a card like Drone Lockbird, but I'm talking more about Salesman in a board breaking context. When you're able to go second and use Salesman calling a card like Detonator or Murakumo, it doesn't matter if your opponent has cards like Prayers, it doesn't matter if your opponent has an Eclipse Winds under Detonator, because no matter what they do, Salesman just makes it so as soon as it's finished resolving, those cards essentially have no effect and are blanked for the rest of the turn. So it doesn't matter that they can dodge normal targeting effects like Imperm or things like that, because this just makes it so no matter where the card is, it just can't use its effect. And I think that because we very specifically are in a format where the end boards are sort of centered around one or maybe two like key end board pieces, I think that Salesman has a ton of potential to be able to just completely shut that card off and make it very difficult for your opponent to interact with you any further unless they have like a bunch of hand traps in hand as well. So because we have cards like Murakumo, Detonator, and even cards like Whitebinder in this format right now, I think that Salesman is something with a lot of potential. And I think that even though this card is pretty inconspicuous and will always just seem like a -1 for the most part, just being able to shut out those key pieces of interruption and make it so your opponent doesn't really have any counterplay to this card, I think overall makes me want to put it in this side deck staple tier. It's definitely something I would not sleep on. Next up is Dark Ruler. I think Dark Ruler is also something with a lot of potential right now. I think in very specific matchups this card can be good. Obviously into those massive combo decks like White Forest, it's very good. Into Ryzo variants that I think aren't Mitsurugi, it can be pretty decent as well. The only reason it's not really good into Mitsurugi Ryzo is because they have a very easy way to just tribute the Murakumo off the board and then summon itself back and then wipe your field. So you don't really deal with the Murakumo when you play this against Mitsu Ryzo. But I guess other Ryzo variants, it should deal with the Detonator. It deals with Detonator, of course, and then if your opponent has extra end board pieces like a Desiree or a DD Wave High King Caesar, this card can be pretty solid. It also hits the Evil Twin Fiendsmith matchup pretty well, so I think overall this card has a lot of potential because it targets very specific decks. So if you want coverage for those decks, I think Dark Ruler is probably one of the best board breakers out there. But unfortunately, it just doesn't do enough, I think, against the best decks like Malice and Mitsu Ryzo, so I wouldn't put it any higher than potential. Ultimate Slayer, I think, is also in a similar boat as Dark Ruler. It's very good in specific matchups, but I don't think it does enough to like the best decks out there. Probably is a tiny bit better than Dark Ruler into like Mitsu Ryzo and Malice, especially if you're playing cards in your extra deck that specifically benefit off of being sent by Ultimate Slayer. Ultimate Slayer just isn't necessarily going to be enough a lot of the times to break an opponent's board. It may be able to trade like 2-for-1 in certain cases. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, a lot of decks have gotten so good at setting up like later interruptions that like not all their interruptions are concentrated on their monsters. So even though Ultimate Slayer can theoretically trade 2-for-1 by like, let's say, sending Aggregator, shuffling the Detonator, and then negating the cross, like the Mitsu Ryzo deck still has so many more interruptions on top of that I generally don't think a card like Slayer is going to be enough. Next up are like the stealing cards like Change of Heart. I think that these are not very good right now. I'll probably put them at like unplayable. I don't really think you'll ever be able to get a ton of value off of this aside from maybe against a deck like Malice. If they don't end on ally code, you could steal a card like Bomber, you could steal a card like Firewall Dragon. That could be decent, I suppose. It takes away a decent part of their end board, but against a deck like Mitsu Ryzo, this card probably won't ever be usable because of a card like Detonator can just easily dodge it. So I think that there aren't too many matchups that I actually want the stealing cards in right now, and unless your deck is like Fiendsmith or something that can take advantage of the bodies that you steal, I probably wouldn't choose to play this in any side deck right now. Herald Database is pretty definitively very bad right now. There are no like Tower S monsters that you really need to out right now. And then for our penultimate card, we have a Dino Wrestler Pankratops. I also don't think this card is very good right now. Dino Wrestler Pankratops kind of shines in a format where you're able to get value by actually running over something in the battle phase and then popping something main phase 2, but there aren't any decks that you'd ever want to do that in right now, so I don't think Pankratops is that good right now. And then Fenrir, I think, is something with some potential. Obviously, it's not going to be breaking like any full board on its own, but it does have the ability to not only give you a free level 7, which can be important in certain decks, it also grabs you some extra advantage that you may be able to put to use by grabbing you an extra Fenrir in your hand, and of course going first, it can be pretty solid interruption as well. But that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. I know that board breakers aren't very popular right now because we are in a hand trap format. I did want to talk about how I felt about each of these board breakers right now, just so you have a better idea of whether or not you can considering putting these in your side decks or your main decks, because like I mentioned at the start of the video, there are topping deck lists that have started to incorporate these back in, so I do think that they're still viable enough to consider at least. But I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you think board breakers are viable, or do you think we should just stick to hand traps? Let me know in the comment section below. Before I end off the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to CardTrader. Be sure to sign up using my affiliate link in the description below and use code Tcg Sam to get 5% off your entire order, while also helping to support the channel. But with all that being said, I just want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.